Greetings and salutations. Thank you for checking out the video. If you like what you see, give the video a like. It helps this channel and it will help YouTube to put more videos about Linux in front of more people. Also, if you are not subscribed, consider subscribing. I plan on doing a lot of videos with this sort of content coming up in the not too distant future. This video is going to be my thoughts and ruminations on a couple of news stories that popped up in my feed over the last week. The first of which is very important and significant in many different ways. According to ZDNet here, it says Linux has over 6% of the desktop market. And they went on to say, yes, you read that right. Here's how. And they break those numbers down. We'll get into those in just a moment. Now, this story came out in July, and it has taken a while to bubble up for me to see it. And I saw it last week, and it went away very quickly, and I didn't get a chance to check it out. I went and looked at it this morning before doing this video because it's been in the back of my mind. I really need to go see what the deal is with that. And boys and girls, this is actually extremely good news for anyone who has a little bit of a care for what happens with free and open Linux on the desktop. And let's first of all scroll down a little bit, take a look at some of the numbers. The numbers that you're going to see come from the federal government, which means that they're not corporate numbers, they're not influenced by any profit motive anywhere. They're just reporting what they saw on a lot of U.S. government websites over a period of time. And apparently we're talking about 15 billion sessions. Okay, this is a lot. 6% of those logins were from actual Linux distributions. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about free and open Linux. But if you take Android, they say here, and you take Chromebook and you throw that in there, that means that the number one operating system that these computers saw when these websites saw when they were logged into was 23%. Now, Windows, if you take Windows 10 and Windows 11, was about 31% here, and they're talking about how Mac OS was 11.7%. The actual operating system with the most logins, not surprisingly, was Android at 16.2% here. And that would be people who were logging in with their phones, of course. And then, kind of a surprise here, only 0.8% of the folks logging into these sites were using Chromebooks. That seems to be quite a low number. So what we're concerned with here is that 6%. That 6% is a really important number because when you're dealing with Android and Chromebook, what you're talking about is an operating system that's provided by Google and locked down by Google. It's not free and open. It is a walled garden. That's exactly what it is. Yes, it has Linux at its heart, which for somebody like Linus Torvalds, that's great, right? Because look at all this Linux usage when I'm writing for the Linux kernel, and he's not really caring about whether it's on a free and open desktop or whether it's a lockdown system. Those of us in the Linux community who care about freedom, we care whether it's locked down or not. So that 6%, that's still a major number. If I take you back 10 years ago, which I'm going to do, there was a video that was posted from Brian Lunduke that I remember from that time, where he was talking about how once the Linux desktop share hit 5%, that the software companies and the hardware companies would have to sit up and take notice and start doing a better job of supporting Linux. Now, you have to remember, this was 10 years ago. A lot has changed since then. The support is better. As a matter of fact, if you have a computer that has AMD stuff in it, an AMD processor, AMD graphics, chances are you're not even going to have to think about installing a driver. It'll be in the kernel. This is wonderful progress, especially since 10 years ago, AMD was the company with absolutely the worst drivers for Linux. So they have done a huge turnaround. For many years, I used to tell people to stay away from AMD, and now I actually recommend it because I'm not a big fan of Intel or NVIDIA these days for different reasons. But that's for another video at another time. So yeah, this number, this 6%, that is a big, big deal. Now, Brian was talking about 5% as being the goal at that time, and shortly after he said that, there was a spike in early 2016 where the desktop share for Linux jumped up to 4%. And of course, that was the thing. We were getting close. Look at the progress. Oh, wow, this is cool. And then the people who provide those numbers at that time, maybe they probably still do, but they were providing numbers at that time. They said, oh, no, we were wrong. They backpedaled on that, and they said, no, it really is something more like 1.3% or something like that. At that point, I started to really look at those numbers as being dubious and stop paying attention to it. And over the years, I've watched as those numbers have been manipulated again and again and again, and Linux would make a slight increase, and then boom, we were back down to 1-something%, or maybe even below that. Like a couple of years ago, a number came up where it was like 0.9% or something like that, which was utter garbage, because anybody who has worked in this community for as long as I have will tell you that just from talking to people around the world, there's a lot more Linux use than these companies want to admit. And of course, it's all because of a profit motive. That's what you're talking about. The U.S. government doesn't have a profit motive in this case. And they're just reporting what they see. So these numbers are very important. And talking about Brian Lunduke, of course, Brian is still around, but Brian is more interested in politics these days than he is in Linux itself. And so, therefore, his videos are quite controversial. So do keep in mind that we are talking about Brian Lunduke as of 10 years ago, not what he's doing today. I don't agree with everything that Brian says today either. But wanted to be very careful how I associated myself with Brian. Don't worry, I still like you, dude, but jeez. Anyway, so this is a big deal. And then ZDNet goes on to talk about reasons why people are starting to use Linux and how we are at an all-time high right now. And, of course, one of the big reasons that this is happening is because people are just sick and tired of Microsoft. That would be probably the number one reason. They are tired of dealing with Microsoft's arrogance. When I was posting videos hot and heavy about Linux 10 years ago, I was not a Microsoft user at all. And a lot of people would accuse me of going, well, you don't run Windows, you don't know anything about it. Yeah. You're going on secondhand information. Well, if you remember that and you felt like that, let me assure you that over the last 6 years, I have had to run Windows 10 for work, which meant that 5, 6, 7 days out of the week, I had to be working in that environment. And I've learned a great deal about Windows 10, and I can tell you that it never ceased to amaze me how arrogant Microsoft was with their users. And that you'd sit down in front of your computer. I cannot tell you how many times this would happen. And you'd boot your computer up, and it would come up to a full screen after you logged in of them trying to sell you something or tell you something, and you would look for a way out, and you couldn't find it, because that's what Microsoft does. They push you into doing what they think you should do or what will profit them the most. They don't give you a way out or a way around it. And at work, I had to deal with things like email. I had absolutely positively no choice to get the email from work other than to log into Microsoft 365 and use their website. Now, they would say, well, we support mail clients like Thunderbird, but then when you go look at what it took to get your mail account from Microsoft to work in Thunderbird, it was jumping through a bunch of hoops. It was crazy. So that's why I stopped using Thunderbird. After I shut down my website and I wasn't hosting my own mail, I just figured, well, I'll just go with the flow. I'll bleat with the rest of the sheep. And then they have made it difficult to stay signed into that because they're constantly wanting more and more information. And this is work we're dealing with. I'm not talking about some personal thing I'm doing. I'm talking about I have to do this because I was working for a company that had that as their infrastructure. And the computer that I used had Windows 10 on it because it's a Windows shop. There's no other way around it. They had very highly specialized software that would only run on Windows, and that's just how it is in radio. Plus, I was forced to use the Adobe suite. We'll talk more about that later on. So, yes, I have experience with Windows, so don't just sit here and go, well, you're just a Linux guy who's just trashing Windows and just running his mouth. No, this is from my own personal experience. Microsoft, they are so arrogant. And finally, this story popped up where Microsoft is facing a lawsuit over Windows 10's end of support. If you have been running Windows 10 and you are on a machine that will not do the upgrade in place, in other words, there's something about it that they don't like, then what they're doing is they're putting these full screen things in people's faces, and they're saying that you absolutely have to get new hardware or upgrade your hardware or whatever to run Windows 10. Now, this lawsuit, apparently, which was filed in San Francisco, I know that. I don't know whether they say it in this particular story in PC World, but I heard that it was in San Francisco where this was filed. Says that not enough people are currently using Windows 11, therefore it isn't right to end support for Windows 10 at this time. Furthermore, by forcing users to give up Windows 10, Microsoft is strong-arming customers into buying new devices and attempting to monopolize the generative AI market. Now, I don't know about that, nor do I care. The part that bugs me about this is the fact that many people wouldn't know where to begin to do upgrades to make their computer, which currently will not run Windows 11, compatible, right? So they're going to just get another computer. The computer that I used for work, the same one I was talking about momentarily here, was, this was a refurb when I got it. So this is a computer, one of those pallet computers that came out of some corporate lease, and my boss stuffed 16 gigabytes of RAM in it. It's got a terabyte SSD. It's one of those Dell little computers. It's not bad. It's not the world's greatest computer, but it's also been extraordinarily reliable. The hardware has. Windows hasn't. Windows has been a pain in the butt. Windows has been more trouble to keep running than any Linux distribution that I've ever used. And you know how the people who criticize Linux will say, well, in Linux, you got to use the terminal and you have to learn all this cryptic blah, 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 blah. Okay, you know what? My experience with Windows has taught me that goes both ways. Because I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had to go to the command line, have been told by some engineer supporting software or having to figure out how to get this thing to work online, where I have had to open up that command line in Windows and put commands in it. And it's been half a dozen one, 6 of the other for the Linux computer that's sitting right next to it. Anyway, I got off the subject here. The part that really bothers me about this is the fact that computers like the one that I've been using for work, They won't run Windows 11, but it's a perfectly adequate machine, right? Those who don't understand that there's an alternative, which is to learn how to use Linux and put that on your computer and stop worrying about Microsoft's garbage and their arrogance, they're thinking the only thing they can do is to go out and buy another machine. And that creates unnecessary e-waste. I mean, we're talking about millions of computers here, folks, that people all of a sudden are being told, well, you can't use your computer anymore. It's been working for them fine up to now. For whatever arbitrary reasons that Microsoft has decided to put this, Windows 11 install. And of course, I've heard back and forth, well, no, you can do this and you can hack it and you can make it install Windows 11. People shouldn't have to do that. And then Windows 11 on its own is just horrible. Like, they really do not want you to be able to create a local account on your computer. Like a traditional account where it comes up and you put, here's your name and you put your password in. No. They want that associated with OneDrive and whatever they're doing, Microsoft.com account. That's how they want it, which means that they get their tentacles deeper into you, right? And people are looking at that and going, no, I don't like it that way. I bought my son a Windows 11 computer. I guess it's been about a year ago now, maybe a little more. And I bought it from a company that refurbs computers. I don't buy new computers. I buy computers from companies that get computers and refurb them. And I think that, first of all, it's more economical. You get more bang for your buck, and it helps to keep hardware out of the tip, as they would say in England, or in the U.S., you'd say in the dump or the landfill. Because that's what happens to a lot of this stuff, is just it gets thrown away and there's no reason for it. Anyway, when I bought that computer, it came with Windows 11 because my son wanted Windows 11. He had had problems gaming on Ubuntu, and he wanted to try Windows 11, and we kind of needed to do that because the video card that was in there needed an advanced driver. It's Intel and NVIDIA, and that's what this machine is. It's a monster machine. Just unbelievable. So I said, okay, you can have Windows 11. And the company that I bought it from, they hacked Windows 11 so that when I got it, it had a local account on it. So all I did was sign into that account, create another account for him, right? Make him an administrator, and then delete the account that they put on the machine. That works on Windows. I do not recommend that on Linux at all. That's not the way you do Linux. There are OEM ways to install Linux that the first user of that machine creates their first account and all of the numbers line up, because in Linux and Unix, the user number is more important. But what they're saying now is that these are technical people that I know, is that when you try to install Windows 11, they really don't want you to make that local account. Just no. And that is just wrong. And of course, somebody always comes along and says, well, you can do it, but you have to hack this and go in. Why should people have to do that? Why can't people boot up a computer and create a local account without having to give away their information to a mega corporation? You see what I'm saying? If you want to buy their products and services, if you want to set up an account, if you want to do that, that should be your decision, not their decision. And I think a lot of people are seeing that and say, I just don't want to deal with it, which is great. So they're coming to Linux, they're coming to Mac. That's another thing those numbers showed, was 11% for Mac. That's a big deal. Not that I'm a huge fan of Mac, but that's for another video. So this is all good news, man. Thank you, Microsoft, for doing this. Thank you to the guy who is suing Microsoft. This is all great. This is wonderful. Because there's going to be a lot of people that are sitting there with a computer that is EOL that are going to say, well, okay, let me go download this Linux stuff. I keep hearing about it. Let me check it out. And they're going to go download Linux Mint or Ubuntu, and they're going to put it on their machine. And of course, a lot of people are going to cause themselves a lot of pain because that's the hardest way there is to learn Linux. It's just to go from one thing to the next. Really, the best way to do Linux, and of course now, if you don't have Windows 10 Pro on your machine, you're kind of out of time, is to get a junk computer and run Linux on it and get up to speed on it and learn how to do what you need to do on Linux, and then get yourself ready to dump Windows. But anyway, so all of this wonderful stuff begs a question. And we're looking at the Adobe website here. You're probably wondering, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, let me tell you what it has to do with. These guys don't support Linux. And they have made a point of not supporting Linux. They have criticized Linux. Maybe about 10 years ago, they looked into it and talked about how the audio in Linux was on alpha level and they couldn't make things work and all this other stuff. It's a bunch of BS. And it was from the start, and anything that they would put up now to say that they wouldn't support Linux is BS as well. There's no reason whatsoever why, technically, you could not run Adobe software natively on Linux, especially since Adobe software these days runs in its own little runtime environment. Okay? It doesn't matter what operating system you're running it on, whether it's Windows or Mac or whatever, because it all runs in its own environment anyway. Linux is quite capable of doing that. And the interface with the audio in Linux is not an issue. It should never be an issue. There are many software platforms out there, or rather pieces of software that are creative in that you would create video or audio that run on Linux and then also run on Mac and Windows. Take, for instance, Audacity. It runs on all the platforms, and it runs on all the platforms quite well. So Adobe saying that they quote-unquote can't make it work on Linux, that's not true. Why do I care? Well, because a lot of people that claim they could never use Linux cite Adobe as one of the reasons. You see, a lot of people have been trained how to use the Adobe creative software. And apparently it was painful for them to learn how to do that. Because the idea of having to go and get another piece of software that basically does the same function and learn how to use it is abhorrent to these people, to the point of that they will scream and yell and blame Linux for not running the software that they need. In their mind, the only way to accomplish anything is to run the exact piece of software that they're used to running and have been running for years. It doesn't occur to them that other people do exactly the same thing without using this software, right? When I went to work for the radio station, I had to use Adobe Audition. That's what we have. And not only that, we had special plugins that integrated it with our automation system, all of this running on Windows. And this is the shop that I'm working for. There's nothing I can do about it. So I had to use the Adobe software. So there wouldn't be any way in the world that I would be able to have a Linux machine running this software, because people would come along and say, well, couldn't you put it in a virtual machine? No. You have to have direct access to the hardware. Yes, you can run Adobe software in a virtual machine that's running Windows, but the performance hit is really going to hurt you. So what I'm hoping is that the folks at Adobe will take a look at these numbers and realize that it's probably time to put a little bit of effort into porting their software over to Linux. Because once they do that, one of the last remaining obstacles for people moving from a locked down, commercial, proprietary operating system to something free and open, it will be gone. This is the last remaining obstacle. because believe me, I could have switched a lot more people over to Linux over the years if I could have told them, yeah, you can run Adobe. It's not a problem. But that was always an issue, and I was always saying, well, if you're used to Photoshop, you can learn how to use GIMP, and if you're used to using Adobe Audition, well, you could use Reaper, or you could use Audacity, or any number of software solutions for audio out there. These are great solutions, but they operate very differently from Adobe Audition. By the way, the history of Adobe Audition goes way back to a computer program called Cool Edit, which was available for Windows 3.11. And I first started seeing it in 1994. It's when I first started using it. And it was version 1 point something back then. That was amazing, to be able to record digital audio into a computer and manipulate it that way. And then later, there was a version of Cool Edit 2000, which added the multi-track feature. I think the best Adobe Audition for editing was Adobe Audition 3. I think it's kind of been downhill since then. And I have considered, if I was going to be doing a lot of audio production, creating a Windows XP machine that would not go on the internet and putting Adobe Audition 3 on it just so I could put audio into it and edit it and then take it out and then do it somewhere else, because it was such a wonderful experience using that software. It's not horrible today, but it's not as good as it was. And I think a lot of that has to do with the UI. So what do you think? Do you think that Adobe needs to be in the Linux world for Linux to move forward? Or are you thinking that, no, there's probably a better solution than Adobe out there anyway? What are your thoughts on what we've talked about here? I'd really like to hear that. Thank you for watching. It is most appreciated. I'll be back again soon.